So Red Bull may have just won their 6th World Championship title, and they may be on a string of wins, the likes of which F1 has never seen before. However, it's not all smooth sailing. This happened after the Singapore Grand Prix, when Max Verstappen was investigated for 3 different incidents of impeding other drivers during qualifying. 3. Didn't get any grid drops, he only got 2 reprimands. Apparently his first reprimands for the season, which I guess means he's been a good boy. You could also say he's been so fast that he hasn't really had any opportunity to impede anybody else. But anyway, after his 3 incidents in Singapore without incident, the drivers weren't happy. They frankly had the shits. Norris and Leclerc want tougher penalties after Verstappen's reprimanded for impeding. Norris was driving like this.
I'm getting a hard on in the middle of the race.
So angry. Championship leader Max Verstappen was investigated for a trio of incidents after qualifying for the Singapore Grand Prix. None resulted in a grid penalty, but 2 led to reprimands, one of which was for impeding Yuki Tsunoda early in Q2. Verstappen had just completed his first timed run of the session and passed Tsunoda. I wish F1 journalists would try just a little bit harder to not put typos and grammatical errors in their articles. It makes them really hard to read. Verstappen had just completed his first time run of the session and passed Tsunoda, who was on his out lap before the final corner. After backing off on his way to the pits, Verstappen delayed Tsunoda on his flying lap, leading the AlphaTauri driver to abandon his effort. After a steward's investigation, which AlphaTauri did not attend, Verstappen received a driving reprimand. Red Bull were fined €5,000 and given a warning. Verstappen was reprimanded for a separate incident where he remained stationary at the end of the pit lane. This was the one that I actually thought he was going to get away with, because the commentary team was saying drivers do this all the time. They pull into the pit lane and just stop, and then they take off like a practice start. He was there for a long, long time though. He basically telegraphed that he was waiting for a gap to open up, which is just like, well, fine, sit in your garage and wait for a gap to open up. Don't block the pit lane and do that. Speaking ahead of the Japanese Grand Prix weekend, Norris said Verstappen's blocking of Tsunoda should have come with a stronger penalty. Look how much of this I've highlighted. Holy heck. I don't want to say too much because I'll just create controversy, but I just think the blocking one on track was the one that should have had a penalty. You block someone, it's not just down to the team. I know the team got the fine at the end of the day, but it should be down to the driver to look into his mirrors. You got nothing else to do the whole lap, just look in your mirrors. Good points. A lot of people seem to struggle to do that. You know when something happens and you say, yeah, a lot of people have problems with that, when you really mean one person has a problem with that? Over to Charles Leclerc. He said he was a bit surprised Verstappen had only been reprimanded for stopping at the end of the pit lane. That could open quite bad situations in the future, but it's always an open discussion with the FIA, trying to explain to them what our point of view is and how to improve. I'm sure we'll have a discussion tomorrow evening at the briefing. Norris called for tougher penalties. I think it should just be harsher penalties for blocking people, because so many people do it. It ruins your lap, ruins your qualifying. He put Yuki out in qualifying when he was P1 in Q1. What did Yuki have to say about it? Well, not much. Tsunoda was reluctant to discuss the incident, but said he sought guidance from the FIA after 2 separate grid penalties earlier this year for impeding rivals. I don't really want to talk about Singapore, but in general, to be honest, it feels like I'm the one getting quite consistent penalties, but it is what it is. Tsunoda has been investigated over 14 incidents in the opening 15 rounds of the championship, more than anyone on the grid. Oh no, poor Yuki.
The car is bad, we know. Please drive it.
So look, it shouldn't matter. It shouldn't matter whether you're fighting for the championship or if you're in the slowest car in the grid. If you impede someone else, you should get a penalty. Here is what happened. This is what changed. FIA says Verstappen penalty let-off was an error. The leniency afforded to Max Verstappen and Logan Sargeant for impeding in Singapore Grand Prix was not to be used as a precedent for future incidents in Formula One. So that was the other point here, is that Logan Sargeant also impeded someone, but he was let off. So I mean, as much as the conspiracy theories go, this was something that people would point to be like, oh yeah, they also let Logan Sargeant off just so that they could also let Max get away with it, so that no one could say, oh, you just always let Max get away with it. Boy, that's a complicated world. It has been admitted by the FIA stewards to F1 teams in Japan that both Max Verstappen and Sargeant should have received 3-place grid drops. They determined in Singapore that for both Verstappen and Sargeant, their on-track impeding offences were the fault of the teams, even though in the past it has been explicitly and repeatedly stated that a lack of communication from the teams should not be used in mitigation of 3-place grid penalties. Ahead of the Japanese Grand Prix weekend, the GDPA director George Russell feared What happened had set a new precedent. You want to have consistency across the board, and it seems pretty clear-cut with a number of those incidents, said Russell. Obviously, what he's concerned about is if one driver impedes another driver and they get a penalty, and then a different driver impedes another driver and they don't get a penalty, which one do you point to say, well, look, I deserve a penalty or I don't, based on how you've adjudicated in the past? When there's such inconsistency, you've got no hope. If there's one thing that we can look at, if there's one thing that we can be thankful for, is that the FIA made a mistake, admitted that they made the mistake, took the only steps that they had to rectify things, but they did it. Now, I know that the anti-Red Bull team will say, like, pretty convenient, Max avoided the penalty, and then they were like, actually, let's just wipe that whole thing from the record. Let's just avoid that entire ugly incident and move on. Look, I mean, the only thing I can say is if Max Verstappen did it again, he wouldn't get away with it. And for all those times that you get mad at the FIA, like saying, you got it wrong, why haven't you fixed it? Why aren't you rectifying something? Well, they just did. So let's embrace that.